So, Phil, thank you for joining me again. This is embarrassing. I had you on the line for like an hour yesterday. We talked about a bunch of different things and got done with our interview, and I uploaded it and I was listening to it and I was like, why does it sound so horrible? And your stuff sounded great, but my stuff, I was like, what on earth is going on? And I I tried to recreate it this morning. I was sending out messages to everybody like, help me fix this thing. I don't get it. I was trying to recreate it this morning and I was recording and playing stuff back. And then I realized, oh, it wasn't using this microphone. I was talking into this microphone for an hour yesterday. That's all set up, but it was pulling the audio from the laptop, like sitting a few feet away from me. So that's why it sounded like I was in a echo chamber. So thank you for jumping back on.
Oh, no problem. I just so anybody who's watching this, if at any point something I say doesn't make sense, just know that yesterday it was this beautiful oratory.
Way better.
Yes. Yeah.
Everything was
So,
way better. So, but we're deleting that. So no chance of pulling that out of the archives. Well, hey, man, this is a lot of fun to be able to talk to you about this kind of stuff. We're doing interviews called Ordinary Ambassadors. I guess my first question out of the gate is, how does that strike you? So you've been in different church settings and different environments. But for you and your wife, what is it like to be a part of a church where we talk about being ordinary ambassadors? Is it exciting? Is it annoying? Is it overwhelming? How does that feel to you guys?
well, it's maybe all of those, not minus the annoying. It can feel overwhelming, but exciting. But I think it's an important concept for us to grab hold of. Uh, when you talk about ministry, mission, it's really easy to just look at the church staff and say that's what they do. Maybe occasionally I have a chance to say something to somebody, but for the most part, it's just about me, taking in what you preach on Sunday, maybe having, a small group study or something like that, and building my faith up. And then that's, sort of the totally encompasses all of what we think about in terms of our spiritual life. But it misses a whole aspect, and thinking about it as being on mission or being um, ambassadors uh, changes our focus. That means that everywhere we go, everything that we do is an opportunity to advance the gospel and do something for Christ. And so it's exciting, but as I said, it can feel overwhelming as well, especially if we're not used to thinking in terms of
Sure.
that.
Yeah, yeah. I'm glad you say that. We talk about it, we preach about it, but I'm glad you're not like, oh man, you're asking me to speak into something that we're not super thrilled on. But yeah, I love the idea of church being about ordinary individuals doing ordinary life, but with gospel intentionality. And so I appreciate that you think in that way and you're, seeking to live in that way. And I hope that people are blessed by our conversation. So you have a really fascinating backstory. You've been in a lot of different environments. You studied and practiced law, then you made a vocational change and you studied and practiced theology. You were in pastoral ministry for a season, and then you're now working at a library. And so, I mean, I'm sure people who are watching this are probably like, huh, how did that happen? What was the transition? So I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about that most recent change from pastoral ministry over to where you're at now.
Yeah. So I was the associate pastor at a church, and the senior pastor uh, decided he it, that God was leading him to a different area, so he was moving. And as I reflected on that, I realized that a senior pastor position was not something that would be a good fit for me. I didn't really know if the church was going to ask me if I wanted to do that, but as I thought about it, I said I knew that that wasn't going to be uh, a really good fit. And in large part because, unlike you, preaching was just not something I, felt like I had been gifted or called to. I certainly did it, but it just, my passions lied elsewhere. And I also thought about it and said, this is probably a way of God saying it's time for us to step aside from the church so that they could focus on what they wanted to do in terms of staffing, whether they wanted to use this as a time to change the structure to just go to a senior pastor, no associate pastor, without having to feel like they were somehow, um, hurting me if they did that. So Jenny and I made the decision uh, to move in a different direction. I assumed at the time that God would lead me to another ministry position. But as we were waiting for that to happen, I took a job, part-time job at the library in Janesville, and I was working in the CERT department. And just over time, God didn't seem to be leading me to another ministry position. So I took up another role in the youth services department at the library. Um, did that for a number of years, doing story times for 4-year-olds, which was something new for me. And then just working in other areas in that department. And then uh, an opening in the adult programming department opened up. And so I moved into the adult programmer. So I now, uh, line up the speakers and plan other programs for the adults because we don't want kids to just have all the educational and fun opportunities. So I get to plan those things for grown-ups. Uh, and so that's kind of maybe a not so quick version of how I got here. But at no point on the road did I, kind of draw this up and say this is, what I'm planning. But it did seem to be where God was leading, and so that an unexpected transition in roles, but that's where God has me right now.
Yeah. As I hear you recount all of that, and I've heard it before, but man, I'm just imagining that was probably pretty hard, right? To make those transitions of, going from pastoral ministry and then into a part-time job, which I'm sure you never thought like, man, I'm kind of heading toward the dream job. Was that hard for you guys?
It was hard, um, probably initially in the transition. Um, it wasn't because it seemed like that made a lot of sense. So it was something, it's always easier when God's leading you in a direction that makes sense to you.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and that's kind of that. But as nothing else was kind of happening in the ministry direction, uh, you start to wonder what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is hard when you don't know kind of what God has next for you, and you feel like you're continuing to wait and wait. Um, but then, so that waiting period is difficult. But then once I think we realized that, this was the next stage of the journey, um, there comes an acceptance, and then hopefully an embracing that,
Mm.
and you find other ways to use your gifting,
Yeah.
skill
Yeah. Cause
to.
you were writing theological stuff. I mean, when you and I first met, you were kind of neck deep in an online theological journal. Then I think later on you moved into kind of into that realm of writing a systematic theology 2-volume devotional book. And so you've continued to kind of leverage the gift mix and the calling that God has for you, but in a new way. I was thinking through, I think a lot of people kind of land in a position in a job where they might say, this isn't my dream job. And so they almost kind of take a break from thinking about what God would want them to do in that moment. And they can almost think like, well, this is just a stepping stone to whatever's next. So I don't really have to invest here or be intentional here. Did you ever feel any of that?
I guess in one sense, I viewed the job at the library as um, just an ordinary job, something to do, until I found something else. Um, so there is a sense in which are you're just thinking about, getting the job done, going home. You don't think much beyond it. Um, I did have the benefit of, because I felt like God had gifted me and called me in a certain direction, that I was looking for other ways to use those gifts and those skills that I had developed in the ways that you had talked about. So I was thinking about it in that direction. But
Okay.
as it related to work, it was just kind of, this is something to, uh, if we're talking about life on mission, I didn't really think about it that
Sure.
much. It was just,
Yeah. My
this
mission
was
field
sort
is
of,
writing, and this is
yeah,
my job, and you keep those separate.
yeah.
Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about your gift mix. You've confessed to me, you've said it like this: I'm not an evangelist, so you're not kind of walking around thinking through, how do I share the gospel? And you've also talked about your temperament. I mean, you just kind of mentioned that work ethic of, I'll put my head down, I'll do my job, I'll get done and go home. So you've kind of expressed to me that there are some kind of personal challenges to being on mission. Do you want to speak into that? What are some of those things that you kind of perceive about yourself?
Yeah. So, I'm much more likely to, although as you can probably already tell, I can talk a lot, but I'm not necessarily this social person who is seeking out personal interactions. I might talk somebody's ear off when I find myself in that, but I'm not necessarily looking for that. So as it comes to sharing your faith or talking to people about their faith, um, you know, I may miss opportunities to do that because I'm not looking for that.
Okay.
Uh, and I, because of what I've studied, uh, uh, things I've been interested in, I'm more likely to want to delve deeply into different apologetic questions, theological issues, and things like that. Which, especially in the workplace, most people aren't looking to get into an extended
Sure.
discussion of that.
Yeah.
So, those can be obstacles for me. And as I mentioned, it can be easy, I think, for any of us to fall into that pattern of, I'm just here to do a job.
Mm.
If God, creates an opportunity, great. But for the most part, I'm just going to come in, do my work, and go home. And when we think of what constitutes an opportunity, it's really, you know, somebody who out of the blue says, "Oh, can you tell me about Jesus?" And that's what constitutes an
Sure.
opportunity. And
Kind of that big
therefore,
dramatic thing. Yeah.
yeah, and therefore there aren't that many opportunities. So
Sure.
if that's my mindset, that's going to be an obstacle because it doesn't happen very often. So you put all those together, you know, uh, it's not, you know, it's not something I'm great at. So when you asked if I would be willing to talk about it, my first reaction was, I'm not really a good example of this. Uh, and despite that, you still wanted me to come on and share all my
Yeah,
failings.
because I think it's important. I know so many of us struggle with a lot of the things you're describing, not being as strategic about those interactions with people, not thinking that the opportunity to share the gospel comes in some big dramatic fashion, and also just feeling a little bit ill-equipped to do it, for a variety of reasons. So when we talked about this, I was like, you know what, that's a good note to strike, because there are so many other people in our church who feel that same way, who would struggle with saying, yeah, I'm living on mission and I'm doing a great job at it. Like, I don't know if there's a bunch of us that can do that. So I appreciate your honesty. Let me ask this then. What are some things that you have done or could do that would help you to be more intentional on that front, just kind of some practical things maybe?
Yeah, I think one thing that would be important for me to keep in mind uh, is kind of what I had alluded to just a bit ago, that you know an opportunity that the Holy Spirit might be presenting is not this, doesn't have to be this dramatic question that somebody asks, or this obvious uh, question, and it doesn't have to lead to a sort of full-blown gospel presentation where the person accepts, puts their faith in Christ, at the end of it. Most people, you know, any given person might be in different spots in their life and further away or closer. Um, and if we think of it just in terms of helping somebody take a step closer, I think we'll find more opportunities
Sure.
um, than we might realize. And so I think redefining what is an opportunity and then committing to pay attention and looking for those opportunities, I think, would be a key to doing a better job of living life on mission and being a better ambassador.
Yeah, no, that's great because it is such a process. And, some of us have that opportunity to be at the tail end where someone is making a decision, but usually you're right. There are so many little conversations along the way and little experiences along the way that make Christianity more attractive or plausible, or whatever the case might be that that particular person needs. So I think just being aware that you could play a part in it, um, big or small, but along the way, it's going to be important that you're available. Um, I guess I'd love to talk a little bit about. So you've mentioned to me before when you were first at the library, you kind of had an MO, like everyone knew this is former pastor Phil, former attorney Phil. And so that probably almost gave you like a little bit of a, on road to those sorts of conversations. Has that kind of faded away now that you've been in this role for a long time?
To some extent, some of the newer staff members probably aren't familiar with it, but there's still plenty of people that uh, kind of were there when I started, and heard the, not necessarily the rumors, but you know heard word that, hey, we got this guy, he's got this you say fascinating past. They might have used different adjectives to describe it, crazy or whatever. And so there's still plenty of people that are aware of that and kind of look at me, you know, through that lens.
Hmm.
Uh, which you had asked, uh, you know, I talked about the challenges, but that actually is one of the opportunities that I've been able to have, not necessarily in having full blown spiritual conversations, but more in the realm of sort of breaking misconceptions about what it means to be a Christian. And oddly enough, a lot of those have come from some political discussions that
Hmm.
happen. So again, in the workplace, you know, you don't have a lot of those conversations because people are, you know, they're reluctant to get anything too controversial. But at different points in times when the news and that it's an election cycle or something like that,
Hmm.
they're bound to pop up.
Sure.
And um, so people knowing my background, knowing that I come from a more evangelical Christian perspective, and that you know that forms an image in their mind, and they have this set of, so he's going to think this, he's going to be this way. And uh, as we had those political conversations, I think people were able to say, well, he's much more level-headed, respectful of my position. He really wants to know why, what I think or why. He's not just forcing his opinion down my throat. um, I think that helps them to look at me and hopefully other believers in a different way. In a related sort of thing, as they watched me do my job and interact with patrons, especially in the youth service department, as I would do stories and I could be silly, and have an opportunity to treat all families with respect and help everybody, regardless of what their situation might be. Again, that maybe challenges a sort of, preconception of, what I might have been like.
Hmm.
Uh, and again, those in and of themselves aren't, you know, enough. Nobody's gonna become a believer as a result of having a preconception, shattered. But that can be the opening that leads to another conversation that can lead to, or if it's not me having that conversation, somebody else that they meet, and maybe they're more open to it because they say, oh, maybe I shouldn't just dismiss, their perspective just because they're come from an evangelical perspective.
Yeah. And that's so much better than reinforcing their preconceptions, of like, oh, Christians are, rude and mean and dismissive of other opinions and, stoic and unable to be compassionate, some of those things that maybe did get toppled down by observing you. So I do think that's a beautiful thing. And I think Christians right now, especially, given everything that's happened in the last 12 months and just kind of the tone and the vibe of the discussions in the political square, I do think we have to pay attention to what you just talked about, the idea of civility and compassion and rationality, of just kind of being able to have those kinds of conversations where we might be talking to a coworker who is totally opposite from us on all the issues that everyone's up in arms about. And to be able to do that in a way where they don't feel like they're the villain or they're the, demon, and to talk to them like a human being and to do that with respect. I do think that goes a long ways right now.
I think
Um,
it does, again, because and I'm sure it goes both ways, but I mean, people have preconceived notions of what Christians are like. If they're not a Christian, they have these, um, and it's a mixed bag of some truth and some false notions. Um, and one of the biggest is irrationality. Many people see our faith as having no basis in reality,
mm,
and so as we can show them that we are level-headed, rational people in other respects,
mhm,
it makes it harder for them to dismiss us when we talk about our faith. And um, also, I think unfairly in many respects, but I think, a lot of people see Christians as being mean spirited.
mhm. They
You're
might not be wrong either.
well, and in some cases, but I think certainly not in all cases. But they
Sure.
they they paint with a broad brush
Hmm.
because they've had that experience with somebody,
Hmm.
and uh, that that makes it that much harder for us to talk to them. And if we can, again, give them another way of looking to say, well, yeah, I still disagree with them. That they still disagree with us, perhaps, but they at least walk away from conversations that we have on all range of topics, as but they were genuinely interested in what I thought and treated me with respect. And and I think that's important because it's not just a strategic, thing that we do. When we interact with other people, there's somebody who is created in the image of God.
Mm.
And I think we need to remember that and treat them with respect and with a certain hopefulness that as we have respectful civil conversations, that we might be able to impact them uh, in various ways and hopefully, again, help them take a small step towards Christ.
Yeah. No, that's been that's been a great theme in our conversation today, of just the ability for kind of ordinary conversations, whether it's in the workplace or even with family at, get-togethers or things like that. The content of the conversation, but the vibe of it as well, I think has an opportunity to influence. So I'd love to just kind of play the tape forward a little bit and just think through, okay, if you're doing this really well, if other believers are doing this really well in your place of employment, like what are some of the things that we could pray toward and hope toward would come true if this were, we were living on mission, being really strategic and intentional, living life with our eyes open, caring for people right in front of us. What do you imagine that could look like?
Well, I mean, if as a church, you know, not just little c, but big C, if we could, all of us, embrace that idea of living life on mission and, treating, you know, all of our conversations as in some sense an opportunity to advance the gospel. I think non-Christians would have a transformed view of us, and they would uh, uh, more often come to us for guidance and support and to answer some tough questions about life, which would then give us an opportunity as we sort of reach out to them in those arenas that other conversations could open up, so that we'd have people who are feeling loved and supported, and ultimately giving us a hearing on our faith, and ultimately having a large number of those people um, turning to Christ as a result of it.
Mm.
Um, you know, I don't know if that's concrete enough, but
Yeah.
that kind of thing, it's difficult. Um, but that would be my hope, that we'd see more of that if we could,
Mhm.
embrace this idea of being ambassadors.
Yeah. Yeah. Amen. I mean, that's what we're trying to do. That's what this is all about, is just trying to make it concrete and real and be honest about the challenges of it, but committed to the beauty of what it could become if we would live in this sort of way. So I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me about it today, Phil. It's always a joy. I'm always encouraged when I spend a few moments with you online or in person. And to those of you that are watching, thank you guys for listening in today. We hope that this has been a blessing. Take care.